Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. It has been a while, but I am very glad to be back and talking with you all here on Soccer for Us, not on the Soccer Down Here morning show or other feeds. I'm glad to be able to talk with you again on this here Soccer for Us podcast. Like I said, it has been a while. We have some news to talk about and some things that have evolved since then. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the Twila Kilgore era that is now over for the U.S. women's national team, kind of debrief and give a retrospective of what we learned, how she performed, and how the team changed under her. And then we'll focus on the summer tournament, specifically about how Greg Berhalter and the U.S. men's national team will have to figure out a way to be still competitive without Sergiño Dest, probably, I don't know, one of their top 3 or 4 best attackers. He is out with a knee injury. PSV reported that not too long ago. So we'll talk about that as well. Before we get going, I do want to remind you that you can subscribe to Soccer Down Here to get all of the Soccer for Us content and all the other content that comes out from the SGH network. You can also follow this podcast on Twitter at Soccer for Us Pod and support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Soccer for Us Pod. So to talk with me on this episode and to chat about both of these topics is a man you have grown to know and love, and someone who still has the most statistically correct takes on the internet. It is Thomas, aka US Keeper. Thomas, great to have you back. Great to talk with you again.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of soccer to be played, in the next several months. So it's exciting times. I'm ready to go, and let's take a look back and see how we did.
Yeah. So first off, let's talk about one disappointing piece of news. You mentioned a lot of soccer in the future, mostly played here in the States. Unfortunately, I guess, if you will, U.S. Soccer and the Mexican Federation have decided to pull their 2027 Women's World Cup bid and, as they said, focus their efforts on 2031. Obviously, this could have been a really unique and impactful moment for U.S. soccer, having both the men's and the women's World Cup back to back. That has never happened, so would have been a first. It does seem, though, that, Thomas, this was a strategic move to make sure they do get a Women's World Cup soon, because as Meg Linehan from The Athletic reported soon after this, Brazil does seem to be the favorite to host in 2027 now. So it seems like, this is my perspective, the U.S. and Mexico / CONCACAF said, okay, well, we'll support Brazil, your bid, if you support us for the next time around. It's a little disappointing, but I do kind of understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into it. And the one thing I heard about it and kind of thought about is would be a potential fatigue factor with having the men's and the women's World Cup back to back on US soil. There's a lot going on in US right now. I think there's a great buildup to the men's World Cup, but I just wonder if there'll be a little bit of fatigue on that. And I know they're hosting the 2028 Olympics, right? And that's another opportunity for soccer. So yeah. I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm actually I said it a while back in a tweet. I'm like, it wouldn't be the worst thing if it got pushed back to 30 to 31, like in my opinion, right? So I think you look at it that way. Honestly, either of those host country, I'm okay with. They're in a great time zone. We're going to get to see all the games in reasonable times. Selfishly, that's kind of how I look at it. So I'm okay with either Brazil or the other, trifecta out in Europe trying to, group getting the bid on that. So.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. We saw what happened in 2014 and 2016 with the World Cup and Olympics back-to-back in Brazil. Now, Brazil is a large country, an economic behemoth in South America, obviously, but obviously not the same level of economic capabilities and, I guess, diversity also as the U.S. But they were economically not very well off after hosting both of those major international tournaments back to back. So I'm also thinking probably from a U.S. perspective, as you mentioned, not just fan fatigue, but also just infrastructure fatigue and economic fatigue from a country standpoint and a people standpoint. Because if you were to tell me that I could go watch soccer tournaments in 2026, 2027, and 2028, while I personally would probably try to go to one of each, I can understand why it would be a lot of soccer and it would make it not as special as we go forward. Plus, just the economic and infrastructure demands that you have on both of an Olympics and a World Cup, hosting those, in 3 consecutive years, that would be a lot.
Well, I mean, I think that when you look at that, you look at the 99, right? US hosted 99, they win the World Cup in 20. I don't know what, I can't remember what the circumstance was, but 2003, they hosted it again.
Oh, that was the SARS virus. That was an epidemic, not a pandemic. Yeah.
Right. So, but you look at the attendance for the 2 different events in 4 years apart, right? One was 1.2 million in 99, and the other one was like, I don't know, 680,000. I mean, that's almost half the amount of attendance to that.
Yeah.
Is there a
The
fatigue?
final was played at Home Depot Center in California. Like, you went from the Rose Bowl, 90,000 plus, to a 27,000 seat stadium. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I think they only used like 6 venues in that in 03, and some of them were larger, but I think they had 3 larger ones and 3 smaller ones, and so
Portland was one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Portland, Columbus, and LA maybe were the smaller ones. So, but you look at that piece of it. I don't know if there was the fatigue there or whatever it was, but that's something to consider too, right? We want to host it in a way that's a great event. We don't want it to be outshined by something else. So I think it's not a bad move on that. Also, and I don't know if the federation is thinking this way, but like maybe we're in a better place, from a team perspective in 31, right? I don't know, right? But maybe they're in a better, because you want to win it on home soil, and they have.
Well, I'll say this: Mexico might be the team that needs to be in a better place too, because remember, Mexico is part of this bid, and they haven't qualified for a World Cup several times. So I do think there's a level of both of those teams need to be a little better. I agree.
Yeah, because that's the thing. You want your host nations to be good teams. I mean, you want them to to be lifting it up. So
Australia had a great tournament this summer, right? They went farther than ever. They're historically a pretty decent team, but yeah, I mean, you want that host nation to have a successful tournament. We won't talk about France losing to us in the quarterfinal. Oh wait, I just mentioned that again. No, I think there's a lot of factors that make this I think we were ambitious, but sometimes ambition can also be a little too greedy. And I think that may have been what this particular bid was of the 2027. I will say what concerns me is if you look at 2031, if Brazil wins it as expected, that will be at least 2 tournaments that UEFA hasn't hosted. If we win it in 2031, that will be 3. Like, UEFA loves to have this thought process that they should host every tournament, so they concede to at least every other tournament. And they're dealing with this now with the Men's World Cup going from Qatar in 2022, the US in 2026, and they somehow got their teeth into the 2030 World Cup. So I'm curious how that will affect things in the 2031 vote. But I personally think from the women's standpoint, as much as Europe is growing the game a lot, there's a lot of growth in the women's game and investment in the women's game around the world. But also we need to improve it there. So if a country like Brazil can get that and start to really invest top to bottom in their women's program and their women's leagues, that would be a win as well. And then you come back to the US and Mexico, 2 countries that have historically been very supportive of their women. That would be another positive step.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I agree with all that. So it's, disappointing, but I'm just, optimistic for, what's to come after it. So
I guess I'll have to travel to Brazil or Germany, Belgium, or Netherlands in 2027. I think there are worse outcomes in my life. But let's stop looking forward a little bit and look back at the Twila Kilgore era. Now, obviously, the U.S. women's national team won the She Believes Cup. They defeated Japan here in Atlanta 2-1, and then ended up winning against Canada in penalty kicks because Alyssa Nair is still the best penalty kick goalkeeper in the world. So Twila got her second trophy. I will caution putting too much weight into winning a She Believes Cup trophy, despite what U.S. Women's National Team program tries to hype that up as some major award, celebrating the 7th time that Nair and Sonnet have won it. I think it's a little ridiculous if you ask me. But anyway, still a trophy. It's still a series of games against good teams that you ended up winning. Her overall record of her 14 games, 10, 3, and 1. That one loss to Mexico in the W Gold Cup that we ended up winning. 2 draws against Canada. Both times we ended up beating them in penalty kicks. What's your overall take on the Twilight era? Just what were your feelings from it?
I think it took a little bit of time for her to just kind of feel like it was hers a little bit. I think we saw pieces of bringing in some younger talent, which was great, and working with that. But with also blending in some of the veteran piece of it. I think it's tough to navigate that. It really is, like knowing like, hey, I don't have this isn't mine, right? I'm just a caretaker of this team until Emma Hayes comes in the door, right? And so I think she did a good job with that. We saw some Vladko in there. We maybe saw some of her stuff in there. Maybe Emma Hayes got into her head on some of those things. There were conversations, but ultimately it was hers. I think for her, it was a great opportunity to, she's what, 40s, in her early 40s. Like
she's fairly young for like coaching. Yeah, I agree.
Right. And so I think, we want to promote American female coaches, right? We want to see those. And this is just a good stepping stone for her. She'll be on Emma Hayes' staff, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, she'll be a holdover for sure.
Right. So that's a good growth for her. And collectively, she did fine. I mean, I think she did what she needed to do. There could have been some different player selections on that, but ultimately, I think we saw, some pretty, expected squads that went out there.
I would even argue that she did a good job of cutting the dead weight from the World Cup. But to your point, like then picking the players that we all have been asking for. For example, Sam Coffey over Andy Sullivan, right? Where we watched how many years of Andy Sullivan under Vlatko and just be not good. And then Twila brings in Sam Coffey, and we kind of see that improvement almost immediately. I mean, players like Jaden Shaw come in. I don't know if Jaden was this is a hot take that I have of the episode, I suppose, but I'm still okay with Jada not going to the World Cup because she's still a teenager. But it was very clear that, especially as she continued with her 2023 NWSL season, that she needed to be on this team. And even to an extent, I mean, I'll give Twila credit. She was the one, I guess, who made the decision to not bring Alex Morgan and Becky Sauerbrunn initially to the W Gold Cup. Now, they got called in because they were veterans who had to be injury replacements. But, I do think that she deserves credit for trying to turn over the squad. And
yeah,
I think she did that okay.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, you saw some teenagers, Corbin Albert was great to see on there. And, you just saw some players blended in, right? With that Moultrie was in there. I mean, she didn't play during She Believes, but that stuff's so important when you're trying to just get a feel of the players, right? They have we've said it before, they have a quick flip from the World Cup to the Olympics, right? And so that flip, you've got to be able to kind of reset pretty quickly, unless for some reason, everything lines up correctly. They do have some older players, that they have to kind of transition out a little bit. And that can be hard sometimes to do that. And I think she did a good job of just seeing some of these other players again in a tournament environment, right? The W Gold Cup, again, that's a huge one to be able to kind of kick it off. And then the She Believes, I mean, it's a kind of a glorified, kind of like the US, Cup was for the men for a while type of tournament. But it was still important, right? It's still important to kind of go out there and just return to a winning culture, right? Get that feeling, and then, and feel good about it, right? Have some adversity, lose to Mexico, come back and win it, right? Tie Canada twice, win in PKs, and I mean, Nair owns it, right? So those sorts of things, that's what builds that next group and that winning culture. It's not gonna be easy, right? It's not gonna be 8-0s, right? So they're gonna be closer played matches, and I think that's
Yeah.
where we are starting to see more of that. But they do have the talent, so.
And especially in tournament play, this is something that I think we as fans, we got, like, for some reason we thought Thailand at 13-0 is going to be how we'll approach any team that's not, France, Spain, Germany, England. And like you just said, the reality is, I mean, we pretty well handled both Dominican Republic and Argentina in the W Gold Cup, but those score lines were not, wide ranges. It was a pretty, you still have to work to beat these teams. No matter who they are anymore, because the women's game has evolved, has changed, has elevated. I do think that, tactically, and I'll again kind of take to task Adam Bells from the Scuff podcast, because he wants this team to play pretty soccer, and I don't disagree, but I think tactically to ask Twila to go from Vlatko Andonovski to do pretty soccer when she doesn't really have any total or full control of the tactics and team meetings and all these things. I think, to your point, winning was more important for this particular period than implementing a brand new philosophy and tactical approach.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's a good, because of the players you got to see. I think it's a good, it level sets the situation and says, hey, this is what we've got for talent. And when Emma's looking at this, and she's going to say, okay, I want to try this, because that's how you have to build international teams. That's the one concern I have with Emma Hayes, is how she going to be able to, put in a system that's simple enough and effective enough for these women to be able to go and play at a high level, because the Olympics is no joke. It's quick turnarounds. It's a you're playing the best.
We got
right?
Germany and Australia in our group.
Right. So there's no, and so they've got 4 matches headed into that before, so they have the opportunity to build that going into the Olympics. So hopefully they can do that, and have now again a little bit of a playbook to kind of see how she's gonna work things and build the best starting 11, and then figure out how the subs are gonna work with it.
Yeah, I think so. I wanted to ask you, did you learn anything? But I think we've established that learning that's a convoluted question. And I think what you said about seeing new players, more players, just getting new faces in. I learned more about the player pool than I did about the team necessarily. But that's what we probably needed right now, because Emma needs to be able to see more people to get a better grasp on the pool, get actual footage of international play from players like Olivia Moultrie, players like Mia Fischel, players, even, we have some on Cat, going back, but how do you evaluate these players? How do you evaluate Alex Morgan as a striker versus Sophia Smith as a striker? And getting actual comparisons of all those, even to the extent of Sam Coffey and Corbin Albert versus Sam Coffey and Lindsay Horan. How do these, pairings work? I think that's what we learned. And it wasn't like we have big takeaways. It's little data points that we can then use. And by we, I mean Emma, but Emma can then use to put together what she believes is the best squad and tactical approach for the Olympics. And then use that as an even better way to kind of hone and build the culture and the philosophy of this team going forward.
Yeah, because I will say, like, the Mallory Swanson addition, like, to this squad, I mean, it's huge. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a different team, right? What would have, I said this to my daughter, because we've been watching a lot of women's soccer, like a lot. And she is a game changer. What would have happened if she's healthy and at that World Cup, right? It's a different team, right? It's a different team.
Yeah.
I mean, she's unbelievable. Like, again, keep her healthy, keep them healthy, because, right, I will say that, I haven't been overly impressed. Sophia Smith struggled a little bit. Trinity Robbins struggled a little bit. I don't know what's behind that, but they're not horrible, but they're definitely intensity levels maybe haven't been there. But that but you can see you're starting to piece together a pretty good squad here.
Yeah.
of young attackers. Again, that's where it's kind of been weak a little bit, right? And so, what does that look like? How does that fit into play, right? Do you drop someone back to attacking? Who knows? I'm so excited to see what Emma Hayes is going to do with this because there are a lot of opportunities. They've got some good talent in there, and I'm just excited to see what's to come with it.
Well, and what's funny, you mentioned Mao coming back from injury. Roosevelt struggled with injury a lot this winter, I guess you could say, and she comes back and scores a game winner in her NWSL, or scores in her NWSL return. She's another player that it kind of felt like we never got the best out of under Vlatko. But at the same time, one thing that I did learn, and I think we knew this, but we learned really well, is that the double pivot with a single attacking midfielder, to me, looks like the best way to get this team off and running quickest, because I think we're best when we're running at defenses. But man, that second half of the She Believes Cup final, when you had Coffee, Haran, and Shaw in the midfield, at least Haran as an 8, or as a maybe a 6 if you want to call it that, but, a more defensive minded or a deeper lying midfielder, and Shaw as your attacking midfielder. That was awesome because Jaden Shaw was the revelation, I think, of the Twila Kilgore era and how important she could be for this team going forward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a thing of beauty. That may have been the best pairing 11 that we saw in the tournament play for
The goal that we scored, Sophia Smith scored at like the beginning of the second half, right, where it was Haran collects the ball, draws the defender, baits the defender, threads the needle to Shaw. Shaw takes one touch, finds Rodman, who takes a touch to settle it and centers it to Smith, and Smith takes a touch and finishes. Like that is direct style of soccer, you know what I'm saying? But that is not kick the ball long and run after it. That is quick attacking movements to get the ball inside of your opponent's area as quickly as possible. And that to me is where this team can excel. And that was just beautiful.
Yeah, it was an amazing sequence, and to build that up, and so you have the groups of players that can do that, and so that's what I'm hoping we'll see.
Yeah.
But it's right now it's still a mystery, right? We'll have to just got another couple months, another month before they play. So
so June 1st and June 4th. So literally we're recording on April 30th. So literally a month between those two, the last day of April and the first day of June. They will be playing Korea Republic and Colorado and Minnesota. And then in July, as their kind of send-off matches, July 13th and July 16th, they will be playing Mexico in New Jersey, and then in DC against Costa Rica on the 16th. So those are kind of the two final matches. Olympics start July 25th. So I don't foresee them playing a friendly or anything in Paris. Maybe, but 16th to 25th isn't really a whole lot of time.
Yeah, maybe closed door travel.
Yeah. And you got to consider that the Olympics is a grind. I mean, it's 3 matches in 6 days. So with only 18 players, mind you. So that's a lot. But I think you have 3 opponents who are good enough to challenge you, but also not good enough to make you have to necessarily change the way you want, like your ideal way of playing. You can go out there and practice that against these 3 opponents.
Yeah, and that's the good thing, right? Like, I mean, that's U.S. wants to play their style, right? Like, I think when you start having to go the other way, then you're saying, well, we have deficiencies in our roster, we have deficiencies, in our styles of play that are not allowing us to play play under control, play under our rules, type of thing, and that's fine. But U.S. has always kind of been able to lead that piece of it. So it's going to be. They're going to be some good matches out there, and they've got to show up. And that's the one thing too we learned, right? They can no longer just wait to turn it on. They have to turn it on from the beginning, right? And none of this like waiting stuff, because they don't have that doesn't exist anymore, in my opinion. Some teams you may be able to do that, not against some of the better teams that like a Germany or an Australia.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, there's a difference between going from a super attacking mindset to, oh, we got to bunker and counter against a Germany or an Australia, or if we make it out, like, you're going to have to change parts of your approach. But, like, to your point, like, we're talking about, like, oh, maybe we should we need to be a little bit more looking for building up on the left side versus the right side because this team is weak on that. Like, that's what you're talking about. We're not going to be worried about that against, like, Korea and Costa Rica,
Right.
We can go out there and just do what we want to do. But, hey. Any last thoughts on Twila or this team where it stands right now?
I think Twila did what she needed to do. I like, where they're headed. It's the roster selection is going to be interesting because what is it, 18, and then they can carry
18
up
and
4.
2 alternates. Yeah.
Is it only
Or
2
4?
alternates?
Yeah. I think it might be 4.
I think it's 4. Yeah, and
it's not a lot.
And I don't know how that alternate really works. I think they can. They're there. They're practicing, and I think they can alternate them in match to match, right? Like you can pick from the 22 for an 18, right? Is that my?
Let me look it up because I felt like
I haven't been able to get a clear.
It's the Olympics. They don't make anything clear. Okay, here you go. We're doing this live on camera. All right. Okay. Each team has to submit a squad of 18 players, 2 of whom must be goalkeepers. Each team can also name a list of 4 alternate players who can place any player in the squad in case of injury during the tournament. So nothing more than just in case of an injury. So yes, they're traveling and they're training, but it's not like as I guess.
So I mean, and in reality, I mean, when you think about it, like you're gonna 18 is probably pretty much your core team, right?
Yeah.
In most tournaments, you're gonna play the same 18s. The fact they only need to have 2 keepers is helpful too.
I think 18. To your point, 18 is like most teams are only going to use 18 players, but the 23 player squad does just give you extra rest time in practice, or you can kind of swap out some players if needed. But yeah, it's still tough, and then I think more importantly than the squad is the fact that you're playing basically every other day. I mean, you get 2 days off between a match. That's tough for them. Okay, well, let's real quick recap again the Olympics schedule because we haven't really talked about it a whole lot, and I think we've had an actual draw since the last time we really chatted. But as I mentioned, U.S. is in Group B with Zambia, Germany, and Australia. Germany, by virtue of not getting out of the group in the World Cup, fell to pot 2. Granted, France was a host nation, so they are pot 1 as well as Spain and the U.S. But Germany, a historic power, the only other team that's won multiple World Cups. That's a tough one to draw in your group. And Australia also a very tough team who, again, coming off of a very good World Cup cycle for them. And then you had Zambia, who is a wild card team who can kind of do a lot of things differently and a lot of things well. It's a tough group for the U.S. women.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, again, it's the Olympics. It's just a smaller, it's
and it's only 12. I think that's the other thing that I will point about the Olympics and just in general is like, why is the men's tournament 16 and the women's is only 12?
Yeah, that I would have. Yeah, I don't know why. I thought it was 16 for.
Nope.
For some reason, I was like, no, it's only 12. So
it's only 12.
But again, I think it's the limit of the tournament. I mean, the Olympics is 2 weeks long. Typically, soccer starts before. Sometimes the Olympics even kicks off, so they can make sure they're getting it in. And obviously, the 3-day turnaround is needed to be able to squeeze the whole tournament in.
Yeah.
So, but you could still get another group in there, right? That's not going to really.
Yeah, especially because you're using third place teams to make up the quarterfinal. So yeah,
right.
Yeah, it is weird. The men qualified first time since 2008. That's awesome. Again, remember this is a U23 squad. We'll get in depth into this, both of these teams as we get closer to the actual tournament. We have a whole Copa America roster to even get out before we can really start assuming who's going and who isn't. But U.S. U23 qualifies. They have to be born on or after January 1st, 2001. That's the cutoff date. Again, 18 players is the roster size. US is in Group A with France, a qualifier to be determined between Asia and Africa, and New Zealand. Now, I do think on face value, now granted, this because we have 16 teams, you have to finish top 2 in your group, but New Zealand you should be able to handle. And the pot 4 team of the Asia versus Africa playoff winner is not going to be like you have. This will be possibly the 4th best Asian team or the 3rd best African team. So I think if you're asking me, we should get out of this group. You just get really nervous because you're playing France.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all dependent on who's available for squad too. I think it's a group you can get.
But all countries are going to deal with that, and that's the thing that I do want to put.
Well, right, yeah,
US fans is.
Yeah, I mean,
we can talk about it. Yeah. Every country is going to deal with it.
I always think back to the Olympics when Neymar played. I believe I'm dreaming, but I believe he played in Olympics, and he was still kind of a pretty top tier talent. So that always sticks in my mind. To me, it's the whole thing is flawed to me. I think I want to see the best 23 available. If it follows suit to what we've seen over the last several camps, we're going to have a good opportunity to put a good group together that's played together in the last several months, and I think that's key.
What concerns me is that the fact that US based like MLS teams are playing that Leagues Cup bullshit that they think that matters. Otherwise, I think if it were just league games, they would be a little bit more down to let some players go.
Yeah, and there's no real flexibility on that. I don't know that the timing never really works out right. It's probably a little better timing because it's late July to early August in terms of kind of, I don't know, and kind of beginning of end of club season where they're get back together. So
you could, in theory, this tournament will end on, if you make the final, August 9. You could, in theory, get back in time for some of a preseason, but a lot of these European leagues start in the middle to late August, so it's not a lot of time. I'm hoping for a lot of the MLS-based players that their clubs understand that Leagues Cup is not as important as this player playing in the Olympics, for both them and also the club as a whole to hopefully then make some money off of these players. Looking at my own club, Atlanta United, thinking, well, I don't need Caleb Wiley playing in the Leagues Cup. I would rather Caleb Wiley be playing in the Olympics and possibly using that as a selling point for either after that or in the winter transfer window. That is the one thing on the women's side that they don't have to worry about. There's no, outside of, some clubs could say no, but I think it's pretty well established that, the women's teams are going to be the top tier teams. On the men's side, you don't. Now, we also have to, again, we'll talk about it in the future, but we also get those 3 allowed overage players if you want them on the men's side. And personally, I'm just saying this, I don't think we need any overage players outside of maybe a center back. But we have 2 goalkeepers in the U23 camp that I'm fine with. We have more than 2, but we can get 2. At best you're talking about maybe bringing Pepe down from the senior team, but he's not an overage player. He's still under the age of 23. And I think even still, I'm not looking at a lot of overage players to come and play in this Olympic tournament.
Yeah, I mean, the past you'd bring a goalkeeper. I don't think that's, again, to your point, not an issue. So center back is definitely probably the weakest of this. I mean, but Jalen Neal's coming back. Maybe he's, it's one of those weird things. I think if you bring an overage player, or whatever, if you use 1 or 3, I think you have to look at what's the benefits of doing this, right? Is it a leadership thing? Is it a skills thing? Or is it to fill gaps? And I think that's the because if we get the squad that I'm hoping we get, it's really helps build this depth, right? It takes it to a next level. It gets them playing a big
Yes.
tournament. It gets that experience, and then who knows from there, right? Like then you've got that pool player. You're not pulling in a friggin' Will Trapp or these crappy players just because they happen to fit the age group that's available. You're bringing in your best players because they have the quality to play at that level, and they're not just 23-year-olds that are happen to be available.
Yeah.
So that,
And that's what I do. I'm hopeful that at least the MLS clubs, hopefully the European clubs, like, for example, Paxton Aronson, will get let go, because this is important for the U.S. team. It's also very important for the players as individuals. Like, playing in Olympics is always an honor, and I'm hopeful that their clubs give them that honor.
yeah, I think having it in France too, maybe a better selling point to that, right? Like
That's
it's
true.
more eyes. It's not in. It's in a good time zone. People are going to see things like it's in a soccer nation that's won the World Cup. That's been successful. Like
Yeah, the
maybe,
travel from Paris, if you make the final, the travel from Paris to, say, Eindhoven, if you're, Ricardo Pepi, not very far. The travel time from Paris to Frankfurt, if you're Paxton Aronson, is not very long. So yeah, I'm with you. Hopefully that's one of those selling points too. All right, so that's the Olympics. Again, we'll talk about that way in the future. We've got multiple episodes to get to before we talk about the Olympics, because we've got multiple tournaments, really, or matches before that, including Copa America, the big one that has been on the mind of U.S. fans for, I don't know, ever since we knew that it was going to be here in the U.S. Obviously, the U.S. is playing in this because we're hosting, but I think it was pretty likely that the U.S. and Mexico were going to be part of this Copa America anyway, given that we need games like this before we host the World Cup in 2026. But all that excitement has kind of been replaced with a little anxiety as of late, because our best right back, and again, probably one of our top 5 players, period, in Sergiño Dest, is out injured with a significant knee injury. We don't know the exact knee injury. I'm going to guess it's an ACL, MCL, LCL, one of those types of injuries. He is on crutches as of last check-in, but he's no longer playing for PSV. They announced an extensive period, which, as we've all kind of deduced, will mean that he's unlikely to play in this Copa America this summer. Thomas, let's just first talk about what the problems this creates, because Sergiño Dest is not just a right back.
Yeah, I mean, he does a lot. He does a lot in the position. I mean, he pushes forward on attack. He distributes the ball. He just does a lot to in the attacking piece of it as well, right? That's kind of where he really we've seen him do well. We've seen him provide a lot for the U.S. Yeah. So he does a lot of those things, and the problem is when you have a player that you rely on so heavily to do that and don't have a backup, that then you're in a position where, like, okay, now we have to start changing how we're going to do things, right? And so, is there anything? I mean, most players, you don't have a mirrored player behind, a lot of, usually on the attacking side. So it's one of those things where you really have to scratch your head and say, okay, well, what now, right? Like, what's Greg gonna do? How is he gonna figure this out? Because this is what managers have to do, right? They've got to figure out how they're gonna, work with the player pool they have available. And when you lose, this is the problem with not having quality depth in your program, right? You have players, but, like, who are they? We know some of them, and we'll talk about some of them, but, like, but none of, and this is where I always get
None of them
frustrated.
spark confidence.
Well, that's the thing, right? And so, but that's where the manager has to put these players in positions for success, right? So what do you do? Like, there's a lot of speculation of, moving players, bringing in these players. And so, it's one of those things where I wish Greg would be a little more transparent in that, and maybe he will when we get there, and say, look, this is what we have to do for this specific tournament, right? We may deal, to think you're going to have look, you rarely ever have your full squad, you know what I mean, available. There's always some, small injury, large injury, that impacts the team. So they're going to have to figure out how they're going to best be able to accommodate that. And
yeah, it's tough because, like you said, Sergiño's contribution to this team and his role on the field specifically is not even replaceable in terms of just like if Pulisic goes down, yes, you're not replacing Christian Pulisic, but you can find a winger who does a lot of the things Christian Pulisic does, right? But Sergiño Dest is a very special type of right back because he's not just even an overlapping fullback type of thing. He is so integral to our build out patterns. He's so important to our possession maintenance. I mean, he is an outlet for a lot of passes. And to me, that is why it's hard to just say, oh, well, you can go put X, Y, and Z person there. Because while we have a lot of players who are capable of playing right back in one way, shape, or form, you're not going to get every single quality and characteristic of Sergiño Dest, which obviously we get, but it's just he has so much that he does at that position that it's going to be hard to replace. But let's talk about some possible solutions, because I think there's like 3 different categories of solutions. And the first one is a like for like replacement. And that could be, I mean, just straight up another right back playing as the right back behind Sergiño Dest, now starting in favor or starting over him from injury. So who are some of those right backs that we can just put into play, do you think?
We know Scally is one that's gonna, he's probably tops
He's the
of the
obvious.
list. Right. He's the obvious one. He's definitely the backup. He hasn't shown great recently with the national team. But again, I think it's putting the team in a position for success, right? Not asking him to do something he can't do, right? And so I think that's where that the game style is going to have to change a little bit, right? With whoever you put in there. So he's got the most experience. And then after that, who else has been on the national team enough, at that position to where you could say, okay, I trust them? Because there's a lot of I think there's a lot of names. I'm not sure. I don't know who I would pick, honestly.
Yeah, that trust word is going to be tough.
That's the thing. Like, because they just haven't been there, right? So I can tell you who I don't trust, but Greg sometimes sees things differently, and that's where that's going to be a tough call. And so you see a lot of like, I'll bring in Brian Reynolds. Well, okay, but he hasn't been with the national team for a long time. Like, you bring him in, maybe, I don't know. Like, that's the thing. I mean, those are the tough decisions. Or you can pull in your MLS players, right? You got Yedlin, you got Shaq Moore, you got Dwan Jones, or you bring in Reggie Cannon, maybe, right? Like, he's kind of resurging a little bit. Or you bring in Fossey, who's had a couple showings. Like, I think Greg typically goes with players he's comfortable with, players that have earned the stock with him along the way. So that being said, I'm hoping it's not a Shaq Moore or DeAndre Yedlin.
I am too.
Because I think those players are done. I think they're washed, personally. I'd rather
I think DeAndre Yedlin, we have to move past him. The World Cup was his last chance, and he was there supposedly for leadership. We don't need him anymore. We've got leaders. We have leaders. We have experience. I'm with you on Shaq Moore. I don't think he's not even playing all that well in MLS, right? Like, it's not like he is a standout guy in MLS right now. He's fine, but I'm with you. I don't want to bring him to the U.S. men's national team. But that is a problem. You start racking your brains of guys behind Joe Scally. I think for me, Brian Reynolds is the one I would most prefer to bring, but I don't think that is at all a slam dunk. I just think he's a little bit more he's going to be more easily integrated into our attack than maybe others. But even then, it's just like that's not a guarantee. It's not a slam dunk, and I don't know how confident I would be if he's starting against a team like, say, oh, I don't know, Uruguay, who we play in our third match of the group stage.
Yeah, and I think what I do wonder, and I think this is what this brings up is like, what does your depth look like, right? What does your depth look like in terms of players being able to play multiple positions, right? Reggie Cannon can play center back and right back. DeJuan Jones can play right back and left back. Like, that piece of it. Scally can play right back and left back. Like, when you look at a tournament of this nature, when you look at building towards a World Cup, I think when you're selecting certain players, maybe that comes into consideration because look, Greg doesn't have the luxury of a 26 player roster where he can select 4 right backs. I'm sorry, he doesn't. As much as he might want to.
You've
Right?
only
So
got
you've got to
23
be
for this tournament.
right. So you've got to be strategic in how you do that and provide the quality depth needed to be able to, hey, if the player gets a knock, he's not going to be able to play a game. Who can I trust to fill in that spot in that specific situation? So you have to kind of look at those things. And I think that's where that, I don't know if Greg can do that, right? Like he kind of had a luxury. He had some buffers for 26 players, right? Because,
you could afford to bring both Shaq Moore and DeAndre Edlin.
Right. And so
you don't have room for either of those guys.
Right. Because you're tight at a lot of positions where like you might have to, to bring in, a striker that plays winger and whatever it is. And so that's where it's going to be interesting to have do that. I mean, again, some of these players, DeJuan Jones being one of them, he's dealing with injury right now, so he may not even be available as an option.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Obviously, I mean, we still have a month and a half before this tournament happens, so hopefully people make it through unscathed. Ryan Reynolds has not appeared for the U.S. men's national team since 2021. That's the problem in like a whole. That's a problem in general. But when you talk about trust, like how do I trust a guy that I haven't seen in 3 years? DeJuan Jones got, he's gotten a lot of runouts in the how do I put this nicely? C tier friendlies. But again, do I trust him when it comes down to actually have to play in Copa America? I don't know. Again, I think DeJuan Jones is probably the only MLS guy that I'm like ready to take. And I say this as an Atlanta United fan who everyone says Brooks Lennon should be at the next call up. I don't think Brooks Lennon is that guy. I'm sorry. I'm okay with the Reggie Cannon idea. And I do want to spend some time on him because I think he was at a bad club in Boa Vista. He was in a bad situation at a club that wasn't really literally able to pay bills a lot of times. And he's been able to find a better footing in England. He's currently with, Queen's Park Rangers. He's still only 25, so he's young enough to have the energy and the youthfulness, but old enough. He's been around the team for a long time. He should be experienced. He should be level-headed as he always has been. I agree with the idea that he can play right back and center back. So that does give you some versatility. But he's another guy who hasn't been with this national team after being a Greg favorite. He hasn't really been with this national team in a while. And I don't know why that scares me, but it does give me, I don't know if it scares me, but it gives me pause that he hasn't been with this team in, oh shoot. I mean, it's been, his last appearance was the Japan friendly before the last World Cup.
Yeah, he's had some tough time with club situation, and he's had some injury, but he's only 25 too. Like, so that's the thing, and
his career is not over by any stretch. I think that's where I would say it's like it's not like he's a Yedlin or Moore. I'm like, I don't need to say any more of you. So yeah.
I mean, I think though, in my opinion, those guys are done. Like, it's a short list. I just have to wonder, like, honestly, to me, it's being all things being equal and being healthy. To me, it's between Cannon and DeJuan Jones. And I've liked what we've seen from DeJuan Jones in the small opportunities he's had, he's done well. I know he's from he's from my area, team wise, and maybe that's where I have a little bias on that. But again, to your point, we haven't seen Cannon in a while either. So like, to me, there's a little bit of a, recency bias with DeJuan Jones, and when you're comparing those other players, because you really haven't seen that, any consistency. So it's going to be probably who's playing best and who's healthiest at the time when it comes to those selections, because and again, Reynolds may not be released, so that's the other thing.
Well, Reynolds is also, so I need to fact check myself a little bit. He was in the Gold Cup squad for 2023, but that was a D-list Gold Cup squad winner with that. He's been playing a lot with the U23 national team. So maybe he is, and you don't want to prioritize Copa America over the Olympics, or the Olympics over. Like, that's not what we're trying to do here. But like, Copa is the senior national team, right? Like, that's, to me, the way I'm looking at it. And so, is it worth bringing Brian Reynolds from the youth national team up to the senior national team? I don't know if he's progressed to that point. I think Greg would probably agree, considering, he just hasn't had a whole lot of looks in actually, I don't want to say competitive matches, with the squad that you would expect to be the top squad. Let's just put it that way. He's not been in that A or even B squad for Greg or whoever is coaching for the past several years. So Reynolds, to me, I'm okay with, like, if I'm looking at Reynolds versus Cannon or DeJuan Jones, I'm okay with leaving Reynolds in that U23 team. Do you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with that. I you're right. Prioritizing is hard. You do have to, national team is priority. But I think the way they're trying to do this, right? Is the right way for the U23 side. If they continue on that path, if in an ideal situation, you get all those players, right? If that happens, great. And then you have other players, I think, that can fill in. Again, it's just, I think it would have to be additional injuries that would impact, him being there. In my opinion, him being there. It's not because he's not talented enough. I just think that there is a progression that we're able to work on this time that I think is helpful for the growth of the depth. And I think that's important for it. But again, if you need to call him in, you'll call him in. You're not gonna, you're not gonna be like, well, because again, call him in over Yedlin, call him in over Shaq Moore all day long. Like, there's no. But again, I think there are other options that you could, that are are suitable options. But it does weaken the team, without Dest. It does weaken the team. For sure. But Dest is a little bit of light. Yeah.
I think that's where I'm at with, like, looking at these replacements of, I think one of Reynolds, Cannon, or Jones will probably, I hope, get called in. I will also say that doesn't necessarily mean that they're playing, because to look to our next kind of batch of solutions, there are players who exist on the roster right now who can play right back. And it's a little bit of a creative solution, but it's not a stretch solution. So Scally maybe is the best, most logical, but let's talk about some of the creative solutions, if you will. Guys who exist already in the roster. And I think for me, this creative solution, the idea for me is I still want to get the best 11 players on the field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, that includes playing possibly Tim Weah, Weston McKennie, or maybe Tyler Adams at right back. I don't love the Tyler Adams thing. We'll get to that. But I do think the idea of Tim Weah, especially, playing right back, and I know people on Twitter want to go back and forth about this, but to me, that gives you the opportunity to put, like, if I'm ranking my players, right? Tim Weah is a top 5 player, 7 player for this U.S. men's national team, depending on how you want to rank it on any given day. He's a very influential player. But if I can move him down, because Joe Scally to me is not a top 15, 18 player for this team. It is, like, I don't want to be harsh on the kid, but like, there are a lot of players who I'm like, yeah, he's a better player. He's a better soccer player than Joe Scally, who we could call in. So if I can move Tim Weah to right back, to make room for Yunus Musa or Malik Tillman, excuse me, on the field. And yes, this may include Gio going to the right wing position. It could mean Tillman going to the right wing position. It could mean a lot of things, but you're getting another better player on the field, someone who is better than Joe Scally onto the field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think my only reservation with this is because the U.S. does lack the quality depth on the winger. Again, you mentioned Reyna and Tillman as options, and they're both valuable options there. I think that's my only hesitation with that piece of it. But I think again, if you're making this move, it changes how you're going to play. You're going to play a little bit differently, I think, because of just the player's skill set in general, right? And so I think that's just a consideration when making the move as well. So maybe you see it in one match, or two matches, but Scally matches up better, at the right back, and that's where Greg's going to have to be creative, right? In we saw a little bit in the 22 World Cup where he had a couple different formations, and he did have some specific tactics for his opponents, which was nice to see, but that's got to come into play, right? We saw it in again, based on injury, you saw it in at the 02 World Cup with Arena. He made changes to lineups based on the players and the opponents he was going to play, right? So he was using those specific tactics in that way, and that's where I don't know if I trust Greg to do this, right? That's the difference, and when it comes to that, right? It comes to a manager, I don't know if Greg's a good manager, but a good manager to a great manager, right? In terms of being able to set those tactics up based on the opponents you're playing to put the best squad on the field to give you the best chance for win.
I think again, I just want to put the best 11. Like at this point, with Sergiño Dest out, my goal is to put the best 11 players out on the field to win a game. To win a game means that maybe the best 11 straight, if you're ranking them, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to help you win the game. But I do feel like Tim Weah or Weston McKennie at right back allows you to put another player on the field who will very much still help you win that game. I'm less. I don't want to put Tyler Adams at right back for a number of reasons. He's back with an injury apparently. And just in general, I think the fall off from Tyler to Cardoso is a little too much. And I would rather Tyler play as a defensive midfielder. But I think, to me, being a little more creative and, to your point, changing a little bit how you play, and even honestly not that much. I mean, if you're putting Tim Weah at right back, he can defend. He's fine at that. But yes, he and Dest do different things as they go down the right wing, but Tim Weah is going to be an attacking fullback in a lot of the same ways that Sergiño Dest would be. So if you don't crucify me, Twitter, I know y'all hate this idea, but if you put Gio Reyna as a right wing player, but Tim Weah is still the farthest right-sided player getting up and down that sideline, and Gio can move in a little centrally, I don't think that's a bad situation.
No, it's fine on the attack for sure. I mean, it's going to give you more attack on that. That's I think that's where you have to maybe change it a little bit, because you can, Jedi likes to bang up the left side too, right? So you can't leave yourself too open.
You could do this against Bolivia. I think Bolivia is the team that is going to be more likely to sit back. Panama, I'm not quite sure. They like to get after it, but maybe Tim Weah up, adding Tim Weah and Gio Reyna on the right side helps neutralize whatever they can do too. But I'm with you. Again, this is not I think that's the thing that people are trying to look at this as oh, you have to do this and we're playing this way forever. This is this makes sense for this game type of thing.
Right. And I'll say this about Adams. So this is kind of tongue in cheek, but it's also, there is some realism. If Greg puts Adams there, he kind of gets what he wants from the beginning, right? Because we saw this whole but he really does, right? Adams is playing right back for certain things, and he moves up. He moves up.
Yeah. He moves up and in. Yep.
Yep. And so, trust me, unless Greg just completely abandoned that from day one, which he, at this point, he may see that opportunity, right? And so, but it's very complex, right? And so, and Adams hasn't played it. Plus, Adams, I mean, honestly, Adams may not even be available. I mean, this
Again,
I
we
love
don't
this
know what's
kid,
going
but
on
he
with the
just
kid.
his health is just not reliable.
Yeah, and that's why I just don't want to waste his minutes at right back.
Yeah.
You know, um, I just personally feel like the slightly creative approach of putting your best 11 players on the field in positions that still allow them to be successful, to me, makes the most sense against most teams you're going to play. Probably not Uruguay, maybe. I don't know. But I would also say that, like, you could start Scally, right? And if things aren't going your way, like the Jamaica game, you bring him off, you move Weah or McKinney to right back, and you bring on a more attacking player, another attacking player. So that's the other thing is there are lots of levers you can pull and buttons you can push to kind of, again, get what you need depending on the game and the game state. The last solution are the weird ones. The least weird, but the one that I'm most curious about is possibly 3 center backs. How would you feel about that?
Yeah, when it happened, that's my first thing that came to mind, right? Like 3 center backs, okay. Then I'm okay with Way on the right wing back, Jedi on the left wing back, and then you have that piece of it a little bit more because they got to track back. They have the defense, plus your center backs are going to be a little more defensive anyway. They're not a huge part of your attack now, right?
Yeah.
So that to me has some opportunity, but we haven't had a chance to really see it,
We haven't
right?
seen that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with it, right? This is the frustration. Greg mentioned it early on. We're going to do this, and Greg just can't even try it, right? Like that's the problem. He's put himself in a position where now we're going to have to be kind of putting these things together a little bit, and so again, maybe you can try it, maybe you can see if it works, but I mean, again, I guess the benefit is this: if we do not see it against the 2 friendlies with Brazil and why am I blanking on the other match? Is it
Colombia.
Uruguay? Colombia. Then
Who, by the way, we will face at least one of those teams in a knockout round.
right.
So
If he
that's
can't
fine.
even show it in one of those matches, then he better not even consider doing it,
Yeah.
right? Because you're gonna have you test it out there. Like as much as I want to win every match, though, you have to utilize those matches to see what's gonna work. Because if it can't
You
work
need to give
against
me
that,
at least 45 minutes in a 3-back set.
yeah,
No matter, even if you don't think that that's the solution, I need to see that because it could be what works. I mean, you put, for example, I don't know what CCV's health status is, so I won't include him. But like, if you put Robinson, Richards, and Ream as your 3 center backs, I'm not entirely sure which one goes where. That's a pretty decent back line that you can then put, other guys in front of them, 7 other players in front of them to do the attacking. So I'm with you that, like, from a defensive standpoint, they're going to be fine, but we need to see 3 center backs from this team in one of these friendlies I got to see it for at least 45 minutes. I'm sorry.
yeah, you have to, and you have to just see what you can do with it because again, that's where you try these things out. But that's where Greg doesn't do that. I mean, he's missed those opportunities too often, and now we're in a situation where we need to consider it, right? And you don't want to.
And now the problem is, if you try it out, it's almost a tell that you're going to do it
Right
in the tournament. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and that's the one thing too. Like even as your coach, you see this, but your attacking formation is different than your defensive formation. We get too locked up in the whatever it is, and so
Sure, yeah,
absolutely, that piece of it comes into play a little bit, and that's where you got to see if it can work, right? You got to see if the right players are coming back and tracking back and doing what they need to do.
If Adams isn't available for any or is on minutes restriction of any kind, 100% we need to go to the 3-back system right now. That's my take. Okay, so other weird solutions at right back could be you bring Brendan Aronson on and say, hey, Brendan, be annoying. He's very good at that. He's a hustle merchant. He loves to defend and win balls back. I think he could be taught how to play right back. That's a weird solution. I'm not.
Yeah, but he actually, in a few matches for the U.S., he's played that role.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, again, as a sub, I don't think that's too far fetched, right? Come in for 20 minutes and just give us everything you got, and help us hold this lead, and don't screw up, and you're fine.
And the other guy who hasn't done it for the U.S., but he has played a tiny, tiny bit at club level is Yunus Musa. I don't think his skill sets are best utilized at right back. I would almost say like I'd rather him at like right wing if we're playing like a 3-4-3, but that's the other option that I can think of that it currently exists on this squad.
Yeah, the other one I just came to mind, and I don't, only because he's played central attacking is Chris Richards. I mean, I don't know if you want to take him out of the center back pairing, but if you have a full roster there, I mean, he's skilled enough where he could, play that position, I think. But
I think it would morph into a 3-back system,
right,
in the sense that you would just have Richard stay home as Jedi gets forward, but he would have the license to get into attack, and he might even do one of like the Greg right back to center defensive mid role where he moves in that space to allow someone else to get forward.
Yeah, and then that's kind of how I envision it a little bit too. Like I can almost envision, like, again, depending on the matchup, like not kind of having that unofficial 3-back piece of it, right? While Jedi pushes forward.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I think Richards is a one who, if you're looking at a center back who I think could do that, Richards is one who I think could. I think if you're not bringing in a direct right back replacement for Dest, which I think you have to, I think there are players on this team who could fill that role as either the backup or the starter. I think that what you just have to get into, and this is what the ultimate question is it worth bringing in Reynolds, Cannon, Jones, Fossey, one of those guys, for, say, Brendan Aronson, who kind of is now a French player, or Haji Wright, or a third striker, so you bring Josh Sargent and Ricardo Pepi and Balogun. I know from a position depth standpoint you think that, but I mean, those guys also bring versatility and depth at other positions. So to me, that's the question: is it worth bringing a not as good player, period, right? Like if I'm listing the top 25 players, Reynolds, Jones, Cannon are not in the top 25. But I'm listing the top 25 players. Sargent, Pepi, Wright, those guys are in it or close to it, much closer than the other right backs I listed. So that's just that trade-off of what do you want to do with that now open roster spot?
Yeah, that comes to versatility, right? Like what players can play what positions, right? So you could conceivably say, hey, Scally's the only real right back I'm bringing, or whatever, but you can't. But you put yourself in a position where, kind of a little bit what we saw in the Nations League, where you don't have a backup option, right? Because they had to move McKinney because Scally had a yellow card, right? You can't, risk having.
They took they took Scally out at halftime. You didn't have a right back replacement. Yeah, you're right.
So I think that's the challenge. I think you can't put yourself in you need to know what those options are, right? I don't think Greg had a great idea of that, but I mean, it wasn't a bad move putting McKinney there, but like what is it? Like, again, to me, that stuff doesn't need to be secrets, but it is a tough question because it also goes in line with if you're going to bring players and put them in different positions, like how effective are they going to be, right? So you look at that.
Here's the question that I have, because I think he's a good player, but Christopher Lund only plays left back. Only. He's not going to start over Jedi Robinson. Yes, he can be a backup to Jedi. We've seen that. It's fine. But maybe that's where you bring a guy like Jones, who can play both left and right back. Aston Scally, but then you just have 3 fullbacks. Does that make sense?
Right.
And
right.
Now that opens up an attacking roster spot.
Right, because then you have a situation where Scally can play left or right, Jones can play left or right, and then if you again, you're still going to be in a position where who's going to be that backup, right? So if you take it from your existing players,
Right.
McKinney, Adams, whoever, right, to play that spot, why not? Like you're still in the same boat. So it's that creativity. And would you add that extra roster spot to your point? I think it has to be thought through. I think you can do that and say, hey, if we get in a situation, Richards can play there, or McKinney can play there, or whatever it is, and then we have the other spots in general. And that's where you kind of have to be careful too, because what do you lose? Like, in my opinion, there's not a lot of other players that can even skill wise play the position better than a McKinney or an Adams or Owea, right? In that right wing back or whatever it is.
They're
Position.
just factually better players than any of the options we've listed.
So I hope Greg gets a little creative with that if he needs to, instead of just saying, well, let's do this sort of thing. Like, tactically try these different things out. Maybe those, I don't know how, they don't really have a huge amount of time to test it during the friendlies, right? He's kind of have to commit to it beforehand.
The good thing is this happened in April. Greg has an entire month to plan, and we have 2 friendlies to really get to it. Now, I think it's pretty certain that the friendlies will be the Copa America roster. But, if there's an actual problem, you can still change that. I don't remember exactly when the Copa America deadline is, but there's going to be a buffer of some sort. But yeah, you have time to think, you have time to plan, and you have time to test. So I'm hoping that Greg does his job. Thomason's face was not convincing.
I don't know. I've had a long time to think about if Greg can do his job. Honestly, there's a big gap between this March and the June break. So,
well, yeah, there is a long break. We have just finished another episode of Soccer for Us, but we will probably be back at least twice during May to get us prepared for all the things that are coming up this summer, because there are a lot of games happening. I mean, we mentioned 2 women's friendlies, and then 2 men's friendlies, and then Copa America, and then 2 women's friendlies, and then both the men's and women's teams playing in the Olympics. It is a lot, and all intertwined with NWSL, MLS, Women's Champions League final. Lindsay Horan's in another Women's Champions League final with Lyon. Knocked out Corbin Albert and Eva Gaetano to do that. But a lot of soccer for U.S. soccer fans. That is a positive if you enjoy watching it.
Oh, for sure. I tell you, I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. My daughter is obsessed right now. Like, again, she's 7, so it's crazy. Luckily, there's a lot of old U.S. women's national team matches on YouTube to watch, and we've watched a ton of them. Old World Cups. We watched the '99 World Cup the other day. That was just magical for her, just watching her. Because that game was wild. Like,
that game was that was, oh my gosh, because those were the 2 best teams. China was unbelievably good at that time too.
Yeah,
I'm glad she's getting to experience and see this. And
I'm reliving it too. It's awesome.
I'm glad she's the dad who's willing to go through it as well.
Yeah, I'm okay, because some of you kind of forget too, like some of the stuff that happened, right? Because I had forgotten that. I'm blanking on her name now, but curly hair, number 10, Akers. I forgot that she got injured in that match.
Yeah, well,
right.
Because that was, I think, before we truly knew that she had whatever the syndrome is about, like chronic fatigue syndrome.
Right.
We kind of knew she had it, but we didn't know what to do. And so she gets hit in the head, and it's like, well, at that point, plus, you forget that Michelle Akers are arguably the best players ever worn the U.S. women's shirt. Definitely one of the best women's players of all time. Certainly a trailblazer. And you didn't have her on for like most of the second half, and the extra time she didn't take a penalty kick.
I know, it was crazy. Like, I'm like, I don't know why I spaced that, but it's fun to relive it for sure.
Well, Thomas, thank you for talking about this U.S. soccer stuff with me. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at USKeeper. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at Soccer for Us Pod. I appreciate everyone. I'm Bart. I'm out.